streaming link. Okay. I believe. Okay. Okay. There's a LinkedIn link for streaming. Okay, I'm live. Okay, 1 second. Thank you everybody for waiting so patiently. We started a little late today. Okay, so hello everyone. This is Sudha Jamte, and this is Weekly WED, our weekly global series. So today we are going to talk about trusted AI. We've talked about inclusive AI ethics, various different dimensions of making AI do the responsible thing, or what is responsible AI in the past. And we have had a guest who spoke to us about what is trusted AI. And you might say, okay, we are talking about, fairness and explainability and inclusion, and what does trusted means? Is this a real thing, or is it just about privacy? And there is more to it. And we have somebody who is actually launching something called trusted AI as a service for companies. So we're going to get the details of that and learn that piece. And we are going to switch a little gear. We have been focusing on generative AI for a while. As a series, last quarter we did that, end of last year, and then we continued on. And we've been giving you a more technical, product focused, how do we build generative AI, and what is this about LLMs, and drag, and we've been going through that. So we are switching gears a little bit. And as a reminder to my students out there is the technology industry. So even if you're a product manager, you might be a product manager in technology industry, or you might be a product manager in a company that is using technology as a customer. It could be enterprise, it could be a startup, it doesn't matter. So there's a difference. I want you to think about it. So when we are thinking of building, we are acting like the data scientist. When we're building models, we are acting like the product manager or entrepreneur. We're building the technology. So we are switching gear and say, now when somebody is deploying a chatbot, or some using ChatGPT and maybe Azure, or somebody is deploying a solution using generative AI for their company, or you're building a product totally on it which is dependent on it, which means you're just using the API, you're making a call, and now that's the back end of it. And then all you're building is your actual solution. And so you're thinking about your customer, their experience, what is this chatbot solving for, where you're creating value. And a lot of your focus goes into what data am I using, right? And so you forget about this once this moves into production. We have not talked about how do you take the LLM into production. So forget about it. But you see, all the AI that you're seeing is in production, is in inference, is what you're interacting with when we are interacting with all kinds of AI. So when your solution is out with in production and a customer is talking to it, you tend to forget that, okay, I built on ChatGPT has been there forever. What if something changes in ChatGPT? What if there is a new bug that is found? So I found, when I shared this on LinkedIn, I found that there is somebody who's tracking all these incidents. They call it incident in the enterprise language. All these incidents that happens, that they find a bug. So they track this, and they've created some fun sites on what ChatGPT is giving. But for the real business, this is an issue, because this is your interaction with your customers, and you need to know if something went wrong. And one of the bugs I had heard about is, at some point, and I believe that's been plugged now in ChatGPT, is when you give a prompt, and that's how you get your answer. Instead of a prompt, if you just gave an empty line, it would you click and it would give you some random response. And so people were like, okay, every hour I'm just going to give an empty chat and see what it says, and it goes back into its brain and it finds whatever topic. And that is what I find very, very interesting. And I had this experience where, when I was testing out one other Gen AI LLM. I won't tell you about it. If it cannot find the answer what it is looking, it typically hallucinates. but this is a bug in the chat GPT itself or in the LLM model itself. So what do you do when you're building your solution and this is interacting with customers? And that's called an incident. And that's what Pamela is going to talk about. At least that aspect, I'm going to ask her about. The trusted AI is what I'm excited about. And for those of you who are our regulars who are here, you can introduce yourself. You can go off camera if you don't want to be recorded, because this is being streamed on LinkedIn and YouTube and getting recorded. And then we'll come and share this with the world from the YouTube recording. This will go on our newsletter for all of you, and it will sit as a recording on LinkedIn. And I'm going to field questions from LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, apologies, we started a little late today, but feel free to post your question. We are going to talk about trusted AI, and I'm going to try and bring some screenshots or some learning from here back to us, a comment on LinkedIn. Okay, that's it. Let me bring Pamela on stage. And I'm very happy when I see my students come in. I see a lot of you, and I also see some of my newer students coming in. So that's wonderful. So um, let me, okay, here we go. Okay. Hello, Pamela. Thank you for joining us. This is Pamela Gupta, and she's been here before talking to us about trusted AI. You can see that behind her background with a nice, cute chocolate look for AI. Uh, so, Pamela is a top um, brand trusted leader in trusted leader in trusted AI space. She's actually on the NIST, which is the standards body and advisory for the government of US in setting standards. And she's been helping build standards for privacy and building trusted AI. And so let me pass it on to Pamela. I want you to introduce yourself beyond my thought process of how you are amazing, because I follow your live streams and your newsletter, and I learn from you every time you come in here. So I appreciate you taking the time. So let me remove myself off the screen and introduce yourself, and then tell us about this trusted AI as a service, and I'll field some questions as we continue on.
Sure. So I'll just give a quick intro and then I'll share my screen as well so that
Yes, thank you.
you can, or I'll do that right now so there's no break later on.
Yeah, no problem at all. You can introduce yourself, then bring the screen also in whatever is comfortable for you.
Okay. So are you seeing the screen sharing
Yes,
that? Okay.
it's perfect. Yes.
Okay. So great. Great to be here. Sudha, talking to you and your students always. What is actually behind me is the Trusted AI logo, and the I in AI is a DNA strand, which is how,
It's not a chocolate.
well,
It
it's
looked like a
not
chocolate
DNA
wrapper to me.
chocolate. No, no, but it's good to explain. If it's not that obvious, I'm happy to do that. Why the DNA, right? I think I strongly believe in the value of AI, and also believe that unless we build trust in right at the DNA and at the very foundation, we are going to actually prevent ourselves from obtaining those goals, not only at a personal level, but as you see in the slide, on a um, broader scale, globally, for the earth, for us, in the long run, what works for us, what works for the environment, what works for the climate change, etc., etc. Okay, but there's AI is everywhere. It's like water now, right? It's so pervasive. And how do we make sure that we don't repeat, firstly, the mistakes that we have made in the past of build first and then go back and fix if there is an issue, or build first and remove the risk later. We don't have that opportunity when it comes to something that is so pervasive. Um, Not only that, in addition to being everywhere, it is extremely complex and very different from systems that we have seen so far. So, a quick background on where I'm coming from is 25 years of creating risk-based, holistic programs that included sustainable and mature processes around cybersecurity and privacy at a enterprise level. And when I did that, right, when you do something of that sort, where companies have a large presence, are global, for example, they have a complex operational and a strategic lens and operational and uh, processes, um, operational model. There is a lot of thought and complexity that goes into what are the risks that are present, what is the immediate value, what is the strategic risk, etc. So through the years, I've had to take a look at that through those lens, but of how can we adopt technology, how can we take more risks and adopt more emerging, be more current in terms of different trends and different technology and different processes, and learn to anticipate the risks that are going to be coming down. So when I started talking about trustworthy AI 5 years ago, and it actually did a call to action on that we need to do this in a very systemic and a overall pervasive way so that we can get the value of AI. It wasn't that I had a crystal ball, right, that I could look into. But based on my experience in looking at, knowing what business is going to come back to me and say, oh, we are just going to go ahead and adopt things, even though there may be risks, we can look at that later, or we have a governance team, we can address that. Um, there is so much different when it comes to trustworthiness of AI and why it's so required. Because unless it's done at that deep level, unless it's done at the very foundation level, it will actually prevent us from getting the gains that we can get. And furthermore, it may actually cause harm. It may have impact and cause harm at a scale that we are not going to be able to address if we don't have the right foundation in place. You hear a lot about putting in the right guardrails, right? I say we need the guardrails, but we also need a strong foundation in order for those guardrails to work. Because without that, it's not going to be effective. So let's take a look at a couple of things. I'll share a couple of
So
slides and then I'm going to
So I
start.
want to ask you one thing. I remember a couple years back you were actually the first person who spoke to me about this. That when we build AI, that we need to start thinking of the risk right at the start. Later, it has become more a standard that there is bias introduced at every stage. So we need to start looking at bias in the data and then at every stage of the ML life cycle. But you were saying when you start building the AI, and at that time we were talking about machine learning, and now it has become all about LLMs. And you said right at the start, is that what you're saying when you're saying thinking about risk? Because the way the AI is built is data science is very excited about LLMs and is building some prototype, or a vendor comes in and some business unit might build a prototype and is very disjointed, and then it gets to the production stage, and governance comes in at a very different stage, or there are general standards laid out that they are supposed to follow to go into production. But you're talking about something at the start. I would like to understand a little bit more of that from, so that various people who are listening from different job roles within the enterprise or thinking of building out their startups would get an idea. And then what does this mean to manage it about after production? We can talk about that later. So you can take it
Okay, sure.
you can do it the way you want if you have a slide that you want to drive it in a certain way. But I'm curious about the start of managing risk. What does that mean?
Okay, so let me address that. So I'm sharing this slide very quickly that shows why we need it, and when we need it, right? We need it at the beginning. And if you see some of the regulations that are coming out, that are in EU AI Act has been finalized. It will go into effect 2 years from now. White House is talking about, the AI blueprint. They came out with an executive order, and they are also releasing sector-specific guidance, such as from HHS. Now, when we are talking about, to your point earlier, to your question, Sudha, about what is, when do you need this, and how does it impact as you're building these systems? What is the risk that you can come across, and what can you anticipate, and how do you factor that in? So the way I look at it is de-risking the adoption or creation of AI using trustworthy AI. What is trustworthy AI? I'm going to talk about it could be security and privacy right at the foundation, could be ethical considerations such as it should be bias free, or in terms of data, or in terms of bias free in terms of algorithms, and there can be both. Bias can be introduced through data or algorithms. What else is there in trustworthy AI? Let's take a look at what, these are 8 pillars I had defined on trustworthy AI also 5 years ago, taking a look at it holistically. And then I'll talk about how it relates to LLMs. So, cybersecurity and privacy right at the foundation, because if you don't secure your data and your access and your infrastructure, your machine learning implementations, whether it's a model or a system that you have bought, that these two, and have the controls in place for what is privacy. This is at the foundation level. Ethics, transparency, and explainability. These are things that are very specific to AI. Okay, we've not had to look at, for example, in conventional systems, what is, when are you using a computer? When are you interacting with a AI system as opposed to a human being? Explainability. How is it making the decisions? Why it's really important based on context. So in healthcare, for example, really important to know why are you coming to a certain decision. If you've been given a diagnosis, what is the basis of that? If you're in a clinical trial, etc., etc. Then regulations. I talked a little bit about that, and I'll weave it all together at some point. Audit and accountability. At the end of the day, for example, if you have a automated system that is being deployed, such as Amazon was talking about doing drones, using drones for delivery, for example. If a drone miscalculates its trajectory and it crashes into a tree in front of your house and goes into flames, you should know who drone it is, who's behind it, what goes into creating that, the path, the path it took, for example. Was it intentional? Was it compromise? Was this an accident, etc.? So all these things come in as you are either designing the implementation of a system, creating that AI product yourself, or you're using those products. You have to take a look at these, you know, case by case, depending on what you are. Your risk is going profile is going to be different. Another thing that's really important to know is that there is predictive AI, and then there is generative AI. And generative AI, when you talk about LLMs, introduce some of the same risks that predictive AI produces and can bring into the picture, but there are some that are unique to LLM. So I'll stop there. So does that answer the question you had? Before I go to the next. Okay, so Sudha might have audio issues, so I'm just going to go
No, I'm
ahead.
here, guys. I'm here. That's good. Yeah, this is what I love. This whole trusted AI as a service in all its color and the brain. I just love it. I'm so glad you got to it. Yeah, I'm just
Thank
on board.
you. And this is actually my brainchild, so I'm very happy about it. This is a graphic I created to give the to kind of simplify, because this is a very complex area, right? When you have trustworthy AI, talked about the eight pillars. NIST has created AI risk management framework. They have seven indicators of trustworthiness. I had defined this long before, 5 years ago, and I had defined eight pillars. I have one extra pillar than NIST, and that is around regulations, because I'm looking at it holistically. Again, from that pragmatic implementation business view of what all can contribute to a risk or creating that strong foundation. Now, let's talk about trusted AI as a service. This is a service we just introduced. It's really something. I'm looking at it because at the value of it, I'm very convinced that it brings value to everyone, whether it's regardless of the sector and regardless of the point in the AI journey a company is, whether you're using LLM or a generative AI in just a customer care center, for example, or you're creating really very highly impactful use cases and applications of AI, such as in healthcare, for example, or creating your own models, right? So regardless of where you are, this is a, taking a look at what is a way to help create the right foundation in a company with a AI center of excellence, reduce the risk, reduce the doubts. If you're in an organization, even if it's a 5 person organization, or it's a 500,000, it's a global Fortune 500, having that center of excellence gives you a way to create and get the value from the technology and reduce the risk. And these are the four areas that are included in this trusted AI as a service. So our capability that we are offering is the ability to write off you know, before you even launch, right at the launching on the runway, looking at where are you going, what is the impact, is it going to be bias that's going to be a risk for you? If it is bias, is it even if it is not a highly regulated industry, but what are you creating? What are you putting in those as data? Is it intellectual property? Is it something that can be problematic for you if gets in your competitor's hand or somebody who's starting out, for example? And how do you approach that? So let's just talk about two examples, okay? And by the way, when it comes to LLMs, I just did a podcast and I was speaking to the chief data scientist at Fiddler, which is a company that is helping organizations create models and put in trustworthy models and figure out if they are behaving the way they are supposed to be, if there's model drift, if there's et cetera, putting in that right governance into the development. And when you're talking about using tools for doing that, again, what we are offering as a trusted AI as a service is, even if you bring in a tool, it may not, tools are not going to solve for your, tools are not a solution, right? Tools are part of a solution. How do you make that a solution? That's what we're bringing to the table. Um, when it comes to LLMs, actually, one more thing I want to mention is we also just did a workshop where we talked about, if you're putting in intellectual property, if you're putting in data that is not minimized, right, in terms of sensitivity, such as personally identifiable information. We just had this workshop this week or last week, actually, and we talked about um, how LLMs have the by their very nature have the ability to memorize data that is very unique, or data that they are getting at a high velocity and a high repetition. Okay, so even if you are in a contract, you have a contract with your provider, your language model provider that says that it is going to be only your data that you can access and nobody else can access your data, and that it's not being used to feed the and train the large language model, it can still be a risk, because unless they change the way large language models work, they're not going to be able to remove anything that is very unique in the as you're feeding it up. So it raises a lot of risk for companies as they're adopting, and it goes beyond just thinking about hallucinations, which is a problem on its own, and you look at the risk around that and you address the risk around that. And we would advise, put a wrapper around how to use that in a safe and secure manner. But then there is also the intellectual property risk. So there's just no easy, quick answer that this is how you do it, right? It's something that you have to be very aware of as you go into this.
Pamela, I've been teaching AI and AI ethics to multiple different master programs. So when I'm talking to the big data students, then we talk about privacy. They say, okay, how do I architect for privacy? And then I teach them. When I talk to the masters in UX design, then they say, okay, how do I design in an ethical way? And then we kind of go through that. So now I'm doing a program for a master's program in Spain, uh, to teach AI to designers to become entrepreneurs. So they want the entire thing end to end. So they're learning to build AI to product management, do some product management to arrive at the customer business use case, and then the design. In fact, they're designers, so they always start thinking about the design. So it is very fascinating for me when you say this, that you think of the risk and think of the assessment right at the start. When you're interacting with companies, is it a product that's already built, or they are thinking about this risk assessment, or is your recommendation to do the risk assessment right at the start? When, because sometimes they just buy, doing a build versus buy decision, that might not be a very thoughtful decision. And they might just say, okay, I have this vendor and an API, everybody is going with this a particular API. And there was this whole thing of everybody was going with GPT, and then there was this whole thing going with Mistral. And so the question is, how do you, I'm not just the mitigating risk part, but how, which groups are coming together, how are you seeing this practically play out? And I want this as a guidance for my students listening out there, because they are product managers or business owners in the enterprise, or building out a startup, and they're thinking about the whole picture. So they don't, especially if they're building startup, they don't have bandwidth to go deal with this later, and the price will be too expensive. So
Right.
what roles are you seeing, and how do you recommend that they come together?
One thing I am not seeing, let me start with that, is a holistic approach to this. Okay. So when we saw the executive order come out, and that was to the federal agencies,
Yeah.
all agencies had to appoint a AI officer. Private companies don't have that right now. There are very few that even have created that role. So where I'm seeing this fall a lot is under data officers, for example, chief data officers. But there you can see how it unravels really quickly, because they are not going to be looking at that whole trustworthiness, those pillars I talked about.
Yeah.
Those, such as security or privacy or explainability, that might come under the whoever is building it, for example. But that whole governance approach and avenue is not under the data officer purview. Okay. So what I would advise a product manager, let's say in this space, who's building out a AI product in a company, to ensure that they are not on the hook. They are not the ones accountable or making the decisions because the business has to be involved when it comes to identifying what are the risks, what should they be looking at, what is the product outcome supposed to be. Again, they should not be the ones making those decisions. It should be really clear as to who's involved, what is the objective that you're working towards, and then to your point, they're not just looking at the risk, right? So they're looking at product functionality, but that again also they should not be the ones left holding the bag on that, because this is very much driven by, there should be a project sponsor, who's sponsoring it, who's behind, who are the other people who should be involved. EU Act, for example, that is formalized now. It is not just holding people, it's not just for companies that are based in Europe. It's also if you're supplying a product, let's say, into Europe, okay, you're a supplier. And that LLM being holding, the workshop I was talking about that we did is for GDPR compliance for LLMs. And one of the conclusions was, for example, even if you think, let's say you're designing a product and there's privacy, firstly you got to be aware: is there privacy data involved, right? Is there data that is sensitive, PII involved, for example, and be really clear on what are those categories. And also know that even if you obfuscate that, uh, it can do inference and it can come to uh, piece it together. So now
Yeah.
you need to have good security controls in place to make sure who has access to that inference, for example. And if it is forward or client facing, for example, if it is outward facing, then how do you make sure that it is not revealing data that should not be is not going to be compliant to.
Yeah. So one of the things that with LLM, I think some of it evolved for machine learning, at least for the most part, saying, okay, how do we check for fairness metrics with the data? How do we make it explainable to a certain degree? And there was some kind of governance body in large companies, right? There's some organization which does governance and has a checklist. But with LLM, it throws every new curveball, right? So
Hmm.
one of the things I'm finding is people are building LLMs, but then this whole thing, they're talking about hallucination. They, in a very discrete piece, they're talking about privacy, and they're generally aware of GDPR or whether they should build out. Because, like you said, if it's the chief data officer, they're aware of how to build this out as a differential privacy so that they can gate it and provide information. And they all protect PII with their life, right? They are very big on, every business owner does not want PII to go. Where I have worked in large companies, there are different levels of access. You don't even get access to the PII, and even if you're building stuff on top of it. But the question is, with LLMs, what I'm seeing out there is it is going to go, and there is no transparency, there is no explainability, right? So it is going to go and fetch information from the internet, or it is going to build whatever, it's going to answer whatever because of the generative nature of it, right? There's no predictability of what it would say. So they're either building fine tuning and saying it will not give this information, it will not talk in this tone, and kind of controlling it, like Gemini is being called out on in a more structured way. And for larger companies, just this week I spoke to somebody on building a LLM chatbot in front of a product catalog. And the thinking was they will use the LLM for its unstructured data, they will use RAG for their product catalog. But then when the LLM produces an output, they are very worried whether it is going to bring competitive information. This is not about giving their information out to competition. It might have the LLM might have scoured the web and might have competitive information from somewhere it is
Right.
stolen, right? Because of how the nature of how the pre-training was done. So they want to gate what it is producing as output. And so everybody is building something called a validation engine, where they are creating some rule based engine on the output of the LLM. So you're chatting and you get a chat back and you think that you're just chatting with the chatbot, and it is canceling your traveling reservation, or it is telling you where to park your car, or it is doing things that that customer support would typically do for you. But in this case, there is like multi layers in the back, right? So you talk, then it goes to RAG, it goes to LLM, and then it produces an output, but it doesn't come to you. They still gate it and say, is it part of our allowed product list? So they're kind of making a rule based engine, which is going backward in my mind in terms of architecture. So do you have a recommendation? Are you seeing conversations about this, how they're thinking about right at the start before the launch, right? Not at the launch, in the architecting the solution piece. And it is with the PMs for the most part. But PMs are burdened with all kinds of boundary questions that they are expected to answer when something goes wrong and something goes well, and the business grows. All of those questions, and even the accuracy of the AI, right? Whether the model can go out at 90% or 60%, or what, that number was with the PM, right? Data scientists will say it's performing great, and I'm seeing a 90% performance, right? And then the PM has to test with the right data set and say, no, 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 I'm not seeing 90. It seems like a 75, and we are on a timeline to go out to the customer. Should we still proceed? And somehow they have that internal conversation, and then it goes out. And the 25% failure is going to create false positive and false negative, unless you have UX design already in the loop, planning for it, and creating a path to apologize, bring in the human, do some kind of mitigation path. I've never seen a single place where they've done that, from involving the UX to for the false positive and false negative. I do teach that in my class. So entrepreneurs who build that end up doing that. So what is your recommendation of how to bring this, and how to reduce the burden on the PM?
Well, I would say that there is a lot more to it than, you really cannot put in static controls for, that these are the we'll put in a rule-based engine, like you said. And you're right. I do also agree that it's kind of going backward, right, in delivering on where we are at for, putting in correlation of trillion-dollar parameters, and now you're talking about a rule-based system to how to put that controls in place and how to monitor the usage. Those are a lot of questions, so that I don't think we'll have time to get through them. Okay, but I would just say that one thing that, when you're talking about things such as intellectual property, what is your intellectual property? And what could be protected information that can reside in these systems because they were trained on data that there was no consent for the most part, and it was put on over they learned over the internet, that companies have to take a look at that in terms of what is client facing, what is external facing, and what is internal to the company facing. What is the value? There is no perfect use case for these systems yet. If you can't have reliability, then that's the major issue, right? And if you have things that are hallucination, as we talked about, that is the problem. So, can you put it reliably in a context where you have to make sure that there is no room for error? Is the question for the PM, really. Just to conclude on this, right? What the other thing that is extremely important, besides the fact that they were trained on data which we don't have control over and is kind of an unknown, is the fact that this is an epitome. When you use a LLM, it is the epitome of a third party managed risk, right? Because you're bringing into your environment a system that has been not only been trained with unknown data, as we have said, maybe I said it 3 times because it is really important. But the other is, the Chat GPT bug that came out last week, for example, where the system, somebody asked, a man asked, should I feed Cheerios to my dog? And it came back with really very strange responses up to the point that it started talking about we should have a deep conversation. And it was extremely off the wall. And what I'm saying is, if we are going to have these systems where, again, to reiterate, unknown data, this is the epitome of a third party risk where you have no idea how um, it's going to react. And there was a bug. This is a bug that can go have extremely negative ramifications if that is not considered and it's put into that context of whether it's client facing or business partner facing, or even within a group, within a company, a group showing it to another, the PM showing it to the business team lead who looks at it and says, "What is this? Right? This is coming up with information or data or output that is totally unacceptable." It's just not the right approach to take. So
So you're saying that they've built, so ChatGPT had some bug. I actually tried to go ask that question to ChatGPT and it is giving the right answer, right? Too much sugar, da 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 da. When I can I feed Cheerios to my dog question. So
yes,
I
six
missed that.
spoon a day. Yes.
I missed that. I might after this I might have to go online and see what exactly it was doing. But I'm sure they've plugged it in. That's the whole thing because everything is API and coming from the cloud. There is a bug, they're going to plug it, right? In previously, when we are just using software, you pay for software, license it, and if there is a bug, they will come and they will tell you and they will say we have a new release. Sometimes they will force us to upgrade a release because of some security bug, right? It is like that. Now they don't have to do that. They just do a OTA, and next time you call the app in the within the product, it automatically calls the next version, unless they are ethical to tell us, or they might tell somebody in IT who is licensing this product, or in this case whoever is the person who is setting up the API for the company, someone somewhere in data science or an ML engineering team, right? How do we even handle this when you say so? Before I let you go, I want one answer, at least like the beginning of this answer, because you always come in and make us think. Hear about ethics and I hear a lot about privacy and security as two different things, and the chief data officer is thinking about the whole architecture, right, on the privacy part. But these are practical things, and I've been giving this Uber example. Uber got sued for facial recognition for the driver app, and then I'm sure Uber paid the bill on that, but then it turned out that it was a Microsoft API and they had not checked it. And then so I always do this as a case study in some of my classes, saying if you are a PM in Uber, how are you going to react when you this news breaks? Or if you're a PM in Microsoft, when Uber makes the call, what do you do? Microsoft decided to pull out of their facial recognition API for commercial use. And a lot of these companies, what they do is they pull out the API when enough customers scream at them, technology companies, but then they don't pull it out from the internet, like from their website, so a developer can go. So somebody like Susanna, who's building out a new startup, would say, "Oh, let me go, and here is an API I could potentially use from this company." And they're building out their pilots, right? When it gets to production is when they have to, it might be late, they might have invested too much time. So before you go, is there some kind of guidance you have? So for specifically not the beginning risk checklist governance, I'm not talking about that, or maybe it'll come to that, right? But after somebody has deployed even a pilot, and this chat is doing something erratic and it is talking to my customer. Today, there is no tracking of what it talks to my customer. Like in the previous version, when we used to build chatbots which were NLP based and say, these are the intents of the customer, we are creating pathways, and we build chatbots. That's what many of the customer support chatbots were built on pre chat GPT, right? So they were documenting, at least, right? They were saying, we thought this will give it and this is what it gives. So they have some kind of confusion matrix analytics for chatbots in the past. I have not seen that for LLM, and if you're watching that and you know that, please educate me. I would love to go test it out. So what do you recommend people to do? First, they could check for the mitigation, from the announcements before it blows up, but you still don't know. maybe not the Cheerio to the dog, but equivalent of that, what ChatGPT did to your customer, it's going to break that, what you say as trust, right? It's going to break my trust with the brand.
Right.
It
So
is
yeah,
something like that, right?
right.
Right. So
Yeah,
what do you recommend? Do you recommend a PM, a business owner? You said, say they are working very amicably. There's a business owner testing out something with GPT and say, okay, we build a pilot. Now we're ready to launch. It's going to do some customer service or app for a chatbot, right? Simple,
yeah.
simple use case.
I
But what
have to
should you
drop,
watch?
Sudha, but
Yes,
I will
tell
just
me.
say one
Answer
thing.
this question and we'll let you go.
Yeah, so, sure. So your generative AI, when you don't have control over what its output is going to be, should not be interfacing with the client. Is a simplest answer. That's where your customer service representatives come in. This is not about job replacement. This is about the customer service having the ability to perform at the level of an experienced, customer care representative, and that they can do with using these tools, right? That's where the value is. I did a podcast with Megan Ma. She's at Stanford, actually. She leads the Codex, the legal team, but talking about responsible and use of and making it a trustworthy application is taking, where is the human in the loop and who is that human?
Yeah,
Because just because ChatGPT was trained with humans in the loop, right? There were humans who were going through the information, but that's not the human in the loop you want. You want the human in the loop who's the right human in the loop. You're giving out advice about, which flight to take and what discount to apply for. By the way, take a look at what I posted on LinkedIn as two of the examples around why we need trust as a service, because there were one was the ChatGPT bug I talked about, how it can impact real time, what it's coming out, and the other is how a company such as Air Canada had a generative AI chatbot it deployed in its customer care, and it was advised one person looking for a bereavement fare that go for your flight, you go spend time with your family, and when you come back, you can apply for that discounted rate for bereavement air travel. But when he came back, he was told by Air Canada that no, you're supposed to do that before. You should have checked our policies. And by the way, they were saying we are not responsible for the chatbot, what it told you. So that's not something that a
yeah,
company can do, you know. But I
yeah.
really have to go. I'm
No,
leading.
it's okay. Where can people find you? This is good. We should wrap up. It's fine. So tell us where we can find you and how people can connect with you.
Yes, so trustedai.ai, that's my website. There's the places there for contact us, also on LinkedIn. Uh, Extremely active on LinkedIn. I'm posting all the time.
Yeah,
And my podcast, I have a podcast called Trustworthy AI, De-risk Adoption of AI. And that's actionable, insights and talking with global leaders and practitioners in the space. So all
sounds
of the
good.
above. Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. We let you go. We started
Okay.
late, so we ended up keeping you late. So we appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a
Thank you.
good one. Bye. And we'll
Bye.
we'll definitely follow on that. Yes, on the
Okay.
podcast. Okay. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you, everybody. This has been, like one of those sessions where I always say that the best session is the one where you start and you have more questions than you started with. And I feel like I've learned more because um, I've always thought that governance. I've seen like central governance organizations come in companies, and they come up with checklist and things that you have to finish and get internal approval for the large companies before things can go into production, and it is very privacy centered. We are talking about intellectual property. We are talking about random things that the chat gpt or equivalent llms could hallucinate and make promises. I've talked about this briefly, where the AI can make up a policy. I did not know it made one up for an airline. So what do you do if your chatbot is representing your company and it makes up a policy and it doesn't exist? How do you even keep track of it? How do you deal with it is a business question. I'm not even talking about that. How do you keep track of it, and what is your role? I think the role of a data architect or the CTO or the chief data officer to make sure things are GDPR compliant, privacy preserving, is I would say it exists in some form, right? It's been discussed so much, it exists. But what about the role of the PM in deciding what is the accuracy of this AI? Whose role is it to track that the chatbot is making things up and it is saying things that is not in your RAG document that you so meticulously pruned and did a build to get your product out? Who is responsible in the company when the chatbot lies? That's a question I don't have not got my answer. At least I'm very happy that Pamela has started this trustedai.ai. That's where we can go find her. I'm actually putting in the chat also, in here on Zoom and also on LinkedIn, her podcast link, so we can go and follow up and learn more, because she's having conversations with business leaders in her podcast on what they are doing, what kind of examples they are facing, and how they are planning this mitigation. So it looks like there is a need for some kind of collaboration within the companies. The whole AI being built by everybody evolved organically in a very chaotic way. And I think even now the AI could start from data scientists being excited about a technology which is what is happening with LLM for the most part, or a vendor coming into a business unit and saying, I've got this product exactly for your domain to solve this particular problem. I've done this with this other customer. And so they kind of convince you that you have to get into the game and do this thing for to stay competitive, right? And then there is the product manager who is saying, okay, how do I build this product, and maybe we can delight the customer, which is a product management terminology, but maybe we can solve a particular business problem. And so all three paths are happening in parallel in companies. At least the ones I'm visiting and talking, who are asking me for advice, have three paths of this happening. And there's usually a collaboration with a business owner, with a product manager, or a product manager with a data scientist. So product manager is that the center of this. So I've not seen the designers come in, think about the AI in a more holistic way and how it affects their design. So I would think that if the AI chatbot is making wrong claims, it will at least affect two different groups, right? One is the PM is always at the center of this, but the product designer is creating this interface where it is chatting. So if you can find for random what is called non-deterministic conditions in the past version of how we would build chatbots, it would all be sent somewhere and say, okay, we don't have an answer for this, and we'll give your details, we'll get back to you, or it'll forward to a human and things like that, right? So we are not doing that non-deterministic pathway with chatbot building today, and everybody is building chatbots and they're becoming an interface for everything. And so that is very important. And the other thing is, whoever is going to come at a different dimension, maybe brand groups who are saying, okay, the chatbot is making claims, and then the customer service people say, no, that's not our rule, we're not going to support you. That's going to create customer churn. If I am with say internet service provider, and they are giving me the chatbot is telling me, it is giving me some kind of rate, and I'm not getting that rate, I call customer service and they don't give it, I'm going to drop out and I'm going to go to their competition. So suddenly marketing might see customer churn go up, they might have brand loyalty go down. There might be underlying reason with the chatbot lying and displeasing your customers. So you guys have to plug it in some form. I don't have the answer. I Like I said, I just found more questions. So I'm going to go back to my classes because my students are super smart, and we'll figure out what we do. But the starting point, I would say, go follow Pamela Gupta. She does live streams. Trustedai.ai is her site where she's giving this AI, trusted AI as a service, to help companies think about this holistically, right at the start, not just as a governance checklist, but to think about this before you architect your our RAG architecture and build this rule based engine, before the LLM or after the LLM, I think you should be thinking about trusted AI right at the beginning. So, with that, I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to stop the live stream. So, if you're coming later, which is what many of you do, I see people live here, but I thank you for joining. But if you're coming back, tag a friend. And if you're coming back and having questions, post a question. We can ask Pamela to answer for us, and she's very very busy, and but she was kind enough to come find time for us. So I'll request her to come and answer those questions for us. So post your questions right here at the chat. And if you're part of the weekly vet community, you can obviously come in and talk to us in our forums. And we're building out a community uh, discussion place where you can come in and talk to each other, and that's what people use to kind of collaborate with each other. You could do that too. Okay, so with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I will see you at weekly vet next Wednesday. Bye.